So one interesting topic that continues to pop up online is the conversation around the Nintendo Switch and where we are at in its current life cycle, because yes, of course, objectively, this thing has been sold since March of 2017, and naturally, you would expect that a console that is nearing 6 years of being available, that you would see some decline in sales performance. However, notably, the Switch has month in and month out consistently led the charts, a lot of times in dollars and unit sales, but most of the time at least in just at the bare minimum total unit sales, as the competition being Sony and Microsoft clearly both have more expensive console options. And in today's video, I want to break down the latest sales data that has this topic flared up once again and discuss whether or not this is a problem for Nintendo and their current forecast and trajectory of Nintendo Switch sales, or if this is a more nuanced issue that we may need to look at a broader perspective of multiple different moving factors around Nintendo and their future hardware production and ultimately console sales. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, today we are having that fun conversation around where Nintendo is at in their current console life cycle with the Switch, as yes, of course, they are in unprecedented, uncharted territories with bringing to market the first ever hybrid form factor console that I think you can safely say has blown away all initial expectations of this thing, especially coming off of the back of a launch like the Wii U, that ultimately that console's life cycle you could argue was cut short because of the poor performance, and Nintendo finally achieved that goal of unifying their handheld playing base and their home console playing base. And while that does lead to certain things like not having games developed on two different Nintendo platforms at the same time, where you might have normally expected Mario to come out on the DS and Mario to come out on the home console somewhat close to each other, it also allows us to, of course, experience our favorite AAA Zelda and Mario games, whether we are at home or on the go. And I think everybody can agree for the most part that the Switch has definitely tapped into a unique market of gamers that do enjoy that pick up and play ability and that dockable when at home ability. And yes, I think unless if Nintendo gets in their own way and wants to do something overly creative that I really don't think they need to do right now, hopefully we will be looking at this hybrid form factor for the foreseeable future with whatever is next, whether or not that's next gen hardware or whether or not that's a simple revision or just a plain out Nintendo Switch 2. But we are not talking about today what Nintendo may or may not be planning with a future revision, or even if it's necessarily needed, but rather some actual hard evidence and data that does show a decline month in and month out on Switch performance. As you may remember if you've been around on the channel, when we talk about things like NPD sales results for the Nintendo Switch specifically, we typically reference it leading the charts compared to the competition, and it's literally been like that, at least from a total unit sales perspective, at one point for like 30 plus months. Then they went back and forth with PlayStation a month or two, and they've always at least been in that number 2 spot in total unit sales, right behind PlayStation, which of course we are starting to see both Sony and Microsoft finally achieve the production levels that they've been striving for since these consoles launched back in 2020, the end of 2020 at that. Because yeah, you may know, you don't just walk into a store and find these things like you sometimes do with a Switch model right now. These Sony and Microsoft consoles have been absolutely something that you really have to go out of your way to track down. It's not something you could make a purchase decision on a whim at a regular retailer. You have to go hunt online and try to track when restocks happen. You have to get into Sony's direct website and their queue on when they go live with sales. You pretty much have to follow somebody who tracks these things down and shouts them out online in order for you to actually own one of these consoles. And that's how it's been this entire time. However, we are now seeing something of a turning point with that, where they're not quite readily available on any random store shelf, but you can definitely, especially on the Xbox end, walk in and find plenty of Series S's and even Series Series X's on occasion just sitting on a regular Walmart shelf or a Best Buy when you go in to browse, and the PS5 has become more readily available as well, with multiple restocks happening with far less waiting periods in between. And yes, this might be the holiday season. You can finally get your hands on one of those next gen or now current gen consoles if you've been looking for them the whole time, because we have finally hit that point in the marketplace with the semiconductor shortage and all of the challenges that arose, of course, primarily from the pandemic and the supply chain issue. We are somewhat getting to the end of that road, and you will start to see these things become more readily available. Now, I want you to keep all of that context in mind when we are talking about these sales numbers, because yes, it is a different landscape this year and towards the back half of this year specifically than it was in years past. And while yes, Nintendo is starting to see decline on their sales numbers, there is also a different kind of perspective to look at, with both Sony and Microsoft effectively finally catching up on their production demands when we look at the following list that you can see tweeted up over from Benji Sales on Twitter, where he's essentially taken the NPD sales data from the software side and console performance as a whole in terms of the October results, and has stack ranked everything accordingly. And to first look at the software portion of this list, you do have to realize that while Nintendo may be third of the group in hardware, they still have some crazy games on their list, which, you know, Mario Rabbids plus Sparks of Hope coming in at number 6. This is on a list where, of course, Call of Duty Modern Warfare is taking the number 1 spot. You have Madden on there in number 4. Then you get Mario plus Rabbids. That's a pretty good spot in my opinion. You have Bayonetta 3 actually cracking the top 10. And then you have silly Mario Kart 8 that it will never stop selling and will absolutely go down as the best Mario Kart in terms of total unit sales, period. I'd be surprised if Nintendo ever even tops it with a future installment. And crazy to think that it's number 11 when it was originally a Wii U game from 2014. We are going to be talking about a 10-year plus lifespan of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe when it's all said and done. Crazy times for sure. But then at the top of this list, you of course see the hardware section, which you have PlayStation 5, then you have Xbox Series. That is a combination of S and X, of course. And then in number 3 spot, which you never historically see Nintendo fall to on the NPD charts, which of course is only tracking the physical software and hardware sales in the North American region, so keep that in mind as well. But yes, you see it clear as day that the Nintendo Switch finished out third on that list, and you do have to have that conversation around the Switch leading into the holiday season here with great Nintendo games that have been coming out throughout 2022. And is it at that point of market saturation where this will only be a further downward decline, and it might be that number 3 spot against the competition for the foreseeable future? And I am definitely in the camp and the mindset that Nintendo should not wait too long to release something new, do a new hardware revision, or do whatever is next as soon as 2023 with the launch of Tears of the Kingdom. I personally think that makes a ton of sense from a marketing standpoint, and even if they want to go create an enthusiast level higher end console that just runs our current games better and maybe has some exclusives on it as well, but for the most part would still remain to be playable on all of the future Switch games. But if you want the higher resolution and the faster frame rate and they want to charge $450 or $500 for it, I think there's a point for that on the market, and I think Nintendo could drive some serious revenue if they did it that way. All of that said, you also have to just realize that this is the Nintendo Switch performing against the competition as they are finally ramping up and hitting production numbers that they have not been able to so far. In Nintendo's most recent investor meetings, they said things like component shortages are still a reason for their declining hardware sales and why they have to actually pull back their sales forecast to 19 million from the forecasted 21. That's a 2 million dip in units, and that is actually notable here, but it is interesting for them to point to supply constraints where it does, at least objectively here in the US, feel like you can go walk in anywhere and buy a Switch, or for sure you can order it online from any major retailer. That is the scenario we are in. So I'll let you be the judge on if you think Nintendo is kind of giving a little bit of a fluff answer there in terms of maybe not wanting to straight up say that yes, there is some market saturation in its close to its 6th year of being sold. I think you can expect that to happen, and I don't even think think that that's a bad thing. I do think that the Switch is aging and its hardware does need a refresh sometime soon, and I think that makes sense for the sales trajectory, but this is also not necessarily a bad news thing for the Switch, because you have to look at it objectively that the Sony PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S launched in November of 2020. So Nintendo has been competing on a console that launched essentially 3.5 full years before these guys. Yes, we did get a Switch Lite revision that's counted in these numbers, and we also got, of course, that OLED with the better handheld display that definitely caused some people, myself included, to double dip in their Switch purchases. But this is still competing hardware with a kind of a console generation that's in its own, if you will, because Nintendo sticks to their own plan and they're not launching around the time of the competition. So you kind of have to have that perspective that yes, Sony and Microsoft are just now getting their console generations launched off to their full potential and really hitting the kind of production targets that they've been wanting to do this entire time. Nobody wanted to launch these brand new consoles in the environment that they did, and all of the consumer demand could not be met. I would expect these consoles to continue to somewhat outperform the Switch. Will we see a bump whenever November hits and Scarlet and Violet drive more Nintendo fans into stores to potentially get those games? I say yes and no. We might see it go back up to the number 2 spot. I definitely think that Sony, with games like God of War Ragnarok and being in the mainstream conversation right now, they probably lead out the charts for the foreseeable future in terms of total unit sales, and I can see Xbox gaining some ground on this. Again, guys, these are consoles that launched in 2020, the end of 2020. People are still just now starting to find these things for the first time, and I do think that market saturation is a real thing, and most people who have wanted to get a Switch have had the opportunity to now do that. So logically, we should expect them to slowly start to decline until Nintendo taps into that user base that does want to justifiably upgrade their Switch to something more powerful or to whatever is next. So all of that said, I still think that the current lineup of the Switch family of systems has a bright future ahead of it, but I also would not comfortably predict that, yeah, we're going to see it lead the charts every month. I actually think that that window has essentially passed, and while we may see it on certain months and months with big releases come back to the top of the charts, I don't think it consistently stays there the way that it did before, especially as Sony and Microsoft are able to hit their broader targets for their production around consoles like PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series line. So yes, this is a shifting of the environment that we are in today, but Nintendo still has plenty of revenue on the table. They're still going to maintain great console numbers and sales going forward. They just might not be the number 1 dog in town anymore until they try to do anything new in terms of Nintendo Switch hardware and have that upgrade base come back to ultimately buy a new one. But I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, all your personal thoughts and feelings around the newest NPD sales data. Do you think we are going to see a period of time where Nintendo's not leading the charge anymore in terms of total unit sales? Do you think that this is a one-off month for them and they will be right back to the top of the charts in terms of sales for next month and for the foreseeable future? Or do you think we are at that point that yes, we will start to see them slowly decline, but not be a stark drop off until ultimately whenever they decide to release and reveal what the future plans are for Nintendo hardware? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around this topic. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.